Okay, welcome to Boston. Welcome to the wonderful weather we're having. My name is Scott Helf, and joining us is also Dr. Jerry Thrush and Terry Ma. And we're here to talk about grounded in reality technology-enabled real-time curriculum mapping and analysis. So that's a wordful, and I want you to sort of focus on the real-time curriculum mapping component of our talk. So I'm a physician, but I'm a chief technology officer at a medical school. I don't see patients. I actually design new technologies and code stuff myself, and I have a team that also does that as well. And our charge is to create sort of new technologies that no one's really doing and sort of push the envelope. Joining us also is Dr. Terrence Ma from Einstein College of Medicine at Yeshiva University. And he's actually an anatomist, also been a CIO in other roles at other medical schools, and is currently the assistant dean for, say it to me because I'm going to mess it up. Educational Information Resources, and I always mess it up. And then Dr. Jerry Thrush is our immunologist actually at Western University of Health Sciences where I work, and also the assistant dean for preclinical education. So we've got kind of a mix of perspectives here and how we actually came about building some of these technologies. So we have some learning objectives like any good lessons. The first is we want to examine the context and the application of curriculum mapping. So that will be Dr. Ma, where he kind of breaks that down for us. Then we would like you to sort of understand how curriculum mapping is achieved through sort of some simple things that we've put together. We've actually created a mashup to be able to achieve this. And the other thing is to really, it kind of irritates me, I don't know about you, but when I go to a conference, people are like, wow, look at all the neat technology we created, and by the way, you can't do it, only we can. So we want to sort of give you the framework of understanding of how we actually went about to build these things so that when you go back to your institution, you can actually apply the lessons that we learned to perhaps build a similar or the same solution at your own institution. So like I said, Dr. Ma will be talking about the history of curriculum mapping, just some overview. A lot of us in the audience are, how many of us are real like tech heads here? How many of us are like totally into technology? Okay. How many of you are like actually educators? You actually educate students. How many of you are administrators? Okay, cool. So we have a little something for everyone. So if you start to nod off a little bit, we'll throw something at you if you're not interested in that part. But the good news is if you get bored, only one of us will be up for a very limited period of time, and then we'll switch over. And then I'm going to go ahead and set the technical stage. And I've purposely struck out technical because even though I'm a technical guy, I'll be talking about the things that don't matter so much as far as tech is concerned and what matters underlying it. Dr. Thrush will be talking about community buy-in. So for those of you who are educators, you want to perk up and find out how he did that. And then I'm actually going to do a demonstration of our solution. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Ma.
Thank you, Scott. So, thank you. So what I'm interested in as I'm really basically the theoretician here, so I'm the one who talks about things that everyone nods off on. So what I want to do is start out talking a little bit about what it is that we think about when we do curriculum mapping, and what is it that we're trying to do educationally. So when you think in terms of the curriculum development process, it's really something that requires ongoing evaluation, and it has certain key points. The key points would be, what do I want my students to learn? How will my students get there? How do I know when my students get there? How do I know that they got there? And where are my students now? This is a cycle that we're going to do for continuous quality improvement, and that is really the goal of what we're trying to do on in the educational process. Well, how do we do that within the academic framework? Well, we're going to do this thing, and I'm going to call it, it's called the process cycle. And what we do is, first of all, we are articulating the mission and goals of the institution and then identifying the specific outcomes that we want from that. Those are extraneous or outside of the cycle of improvement. And then once we do that, we enter into a process. And this process is, first of all, asks the question, what are the things that we want to do to achieve the outcomes that we have determined? And then we gather the evidence as to, we gather the evidence as to whether or not we're moving towards that, achieving that process. Then we review and interpret results, recommend actions, and cycle back to see if we increase how we change within this process cycle. So what we have to do is we have to have a tool that collects the evidence And that tool in this particular purpose is going to be curriculum mapping. Now, this is a very, very sophisticated graph that talks about how you think about the process of curriculum mapping and curriculum structure organization. You'll notice that it is a very, very new concept. It was published by the Virginia Department of Education in 2001, and it has been in great use by the K-12 community since that time. How many of you do K-12 education? Okay, then you know all this stuff already. There is such a thing as pacing. Whoops, I'm pressing the wrong button all the time. Sorry about that. So you know that there's such a thing as pacing. And pacing is basically organizing and getting to understand exactly what it is that you want within your curriculum. You map what you're actually teaching. Then you try to align what is from mapped to what is pacing, however, bearing in mind that this process cycle allows you to change the pacing so that you can change what it is there. Now, I'm going to suggest to you that there's a term that Scott's going to talk about a little bit later called architecting, curriculum architecting, and that's really pacing right here. And we'll talk, and Scott will talk about that in a little bit. So within this sort of cyclic framework, what is it that we need to be able to do? The question is, well, what are the purposes of curriculum mapping? First, it allows us to check for unnecessary redundancies. Note that it's unnecessary redundancies. We want certain redundancies to reinforce concepts. We're looking for inconsistencies between what we teach. We're looking for misalignments, weaknesses, and gaps. Next thing is that we want to look at the relationships between the components of the student curriculum as well as the student learning outcomes. What is the difference between the two? Next thing is to identify opportunities of integration between disciplines and look at a review of the assessment methods to see how we are doing so that we can identify what it is that students have learned. These principles were published recently, in 2013, in Education World, another K-12 publication, summarizing the work of individuals who have been involved in curriculum mapping. So all I'm trying to do is talk to us, and particularly in the medical schools, about how we are bringing K-12 educational concepts into higher education and in medical education, and trying to do things that they really do well in K-12 so that we can improve our curriculum in the medical school. So, this is a slide that is probably one of the stalwart slides that we use in our talks, and that's this. You can find ways to submit information and data, and then you can collect them into some sort of location, and then you want to analyze those data and disseminate the data. However, it doesn't make any difference what it is that you're trying to do if you do not do some things first. And the most important thing you need to do is to agree on the data. And when you're agreeing on the data, we're not only talking about, well, 1 is the number 1, but rather what are the components of the data, both in terms of its data structure as well as the associated metadata. So let's talk about the framework that we have in medical education. We have things that I'm going to call desires and actions. And I would bet that these are very similar to any other educational program. First, an institution has missions and goals. These are usually very lofty, nice and wonderful, but not measurable. What we can do is that for a student, they have either achieved a competency. In medical education, we have things called entrustable professional activities. These are things, or EPAs, these are things that the student is capable of doing on their own, are trusted to do that. For example, they can draw blood on their own, or they can give an injection on their own. And we have now defined that there are 13 of these EPAs that students must be able to do in order to get from medical school into their residency programs. Next thing are milestones, and those are just another type of activity by the learner that define what it is that that is defining the outcome of the mission and goals of the institution. And then on the course and course level, we always tell everyone that, well, we have objectives. And objectives are written so that we can tell what is desired, how we measure them, and the time frame in which these objectives are measured. That's standard terminology. But that has nothing to do with the student. What the student is capable of doing is providing outcomes. And we look at outcomes by measuring a result and showing the effective data collection and the time frame for that data collection. And so what we're really looking about is looking at the learner and what are the expectations of the learner versus what are those in the institution. And these happen to be the framework that I use within my medical school and several other medical schools that we've been talking about these issues. So the question that I want to ask is, what do we know? How do we know what we want to know? Well, we want things to be measurable so we can take a look at them regardless of whether it's a cognitive, affective, or behavioral issue and start looking at those things and say, these are what we want to be able to measure and look at. We want them to be meaningful. Does it matter that the student has achieved this outcome? We can say that in medical school it is a good outcome that they can put on their shoes, but does it matter that they can put on their shoes as a medical student? Maybe, maybe not. Is it manageable? Let's say that we collect every piece of data that we can get about a student. All right? We know exactly what they eat. Does it matter that I know that student X eats 250 pieces of popcorn every time versus student Y who has 600 pieces of popcorn every time? Does that matter? Do we care? And does it matter in terms of manageability? Is it something that we have that is useful to us? And last of all, and probably what I think is most important, is it mappable? Can we put that within the framework of the objectives that we want and within the learning outcomes that we want? And does it meet or move towards understanding our competencies for the medical student or for any other student for that matter? So in medical education, we have certain tensions, just like in every other educational program. We need to be able to teach more, but we have to do it in less time. We have to teach it effectively. However, we need to teach so that they have time to understand it. We need to teach clinically relevant information because they're going to go into medicine. But at the same time, we have to teach them basics, which may not have clinical correlation right off the top. So we decide, in the medical field, we have an experiment that's going on. The American Association of Medical Colleges, AAMC, and an organization which is a standard-setting organization called Midbiquitous have put together an experiment. And the experiment is the Curriculum Inventory Project. And what it is to create a tool that is a benchmarking and reporting tool on the content, structure, delivery, and assessment of medical curricula across the United States and Canada. So, it is based on this thing called the Midbiquitous Schema, the Curriculum Inventory Schema. The objective is to provide a data structure to represent a health profession's curriculum in a standard format for those who care. This is an XML document, XML specification. And then for this to work, there must be standardization. So what's standardized? Well, we can standardize anything we want. But if we talk in every language we want, so that my medical school says it our way, your medical school says it some other way, their medical school says it's another way, we have a Tower of Babel, which is not comprehensible. So we must have a common language. And the common language is linked to the schema framework from Midbiquitous. It is based on an event. And every event has expectations and has other things, such as titles, durations, description, keywords, expectations, instructional assessment methods, and resources. Well, keywords are very simple. We just use one of these systems, either the MESH terms or the UMLS, which provides all the medical terminologies possible. However, the problem with UMLS is that there are about 11,400,000 terms available. That is not a very usable system, so most of us actually focus on the MESH keywords, in which there are about 27,000 keywords which tell you what everything there is in the medical subject heading system. And in Midbiquitous, what they've done is they've also determined this. These are all the instructional methods available in medical schools. That's it. These are all the assessment methods, and these are all the resource types. So this standard setting organization has taken these terms, standardized these terms, and defined them so that all of us can go to them and now use these terms. And so my use of games is going to be the same as Scott's use of games. We've taken expectations, and expectations, which are competencies, milestones, EPAs, and objectives, put them all into one bucket so that we have one thing, and then we have a definition of how they're mapped so that the event level, the session, maps to the sequence block level, which is a course, which maps to the program level, which is the medical school, which then maps to the physician competency reference set, which is the national set of competencies that have been defined by the American Association of Medical Colleges. So we can map everything in our system all the way from the lowest level, what's happening in the class, all the way up to the top. And this is all done using a common language system. So that's the framework in which those of us who are now in medical schools are functioning. I'm now going to pass it over to Scott.
Thanks, Terry. Okay, good. There we go. Thanks, Terry. So when we first gave this talk in Florida about 2 years ago, I didn't know what the heck Terry was talking about, right? So I was asked to actually give a talk on measuring competencies and learning outcomes, and I'm a tech guy. And Terry started talking, and I really, it took me about 6 months, even after we'd given the talk, for it really to settle in. So I want to talk about setting the technical stage, and I'm going to make an argument about architecting versus mapping. Okay, how many of you guys do curriculum mapping at your school? Okay, lies. I say you do curriculum architecting. I'm going to make this argument. You can tell me I'm wrong. Okay, so how many of you have a curriculum map? It looks something like this, where you sort of, you have your, I don't know if I'm going to do this right with a laser pointer. I'm going to push the wrong button, but in column A, basically, you have your courses. Your competencies, and then column or row 2 or so is the course name. And you sort of say, is this introductory, is this right? This is not, I will argue, mapping. This is curriculum architecting, and here's why I say this. What is this? Anyone seen this before? It's down under? There you go, it's the Sydney Opera House, right? So before they decided to build this beautiful structure, somebody sat down and said, you know what? You may have a really great idea. We should write this down on paper, and then we should go build it. And I would argue when you set out your lesson plans, that's exactly what you're doing. You're saying, we have kindergartners. They need to learn how to finger paint. They need to learn how to add. They need to learn how to these things, and this is when they're going to learn how to do it. That is architecting. You say, and so you say you have a plan, and then you build your plan. That is architecting. Okay, I know they call it mapping, but I say it's a misnomer. Okay, this is a bad thing. This is a house. They got crushed by an earthquake. And so people said, well, why is that? Why does this happen on the West Coast so much? Someone said, well, why don't we map all the seismic areas in the United States, and then we can predict when these sort of things will happen. This is architecting. This is mapping. Okay? So what I'm going to argue is what we're doing at our medical school is actually mapping, because the dirty little secret is we never set out and said, here's the longitudinal things that all the students have to learn. It all just sort of came together, and we didn't know exactly what people were learning. So what are we trying to achieve? So what I'd sort of make the argument of is we're trying to get through the matrix. We're trying to say, I don't know how all this medical school curriculum fits together, and no one really does. It's too big. We have, I think Terry told me how many? 200 people teaching?
No.
So in the preclinical class, in the first 2 years of medical school, there are 250 professors that teach the students, okay? And we have something maybe in the 100 range. And what happened was the departments all got together and said, we need to teach medicine to these students. And they went their separate ways and built this curriculum that's not integrated. So I wanted to know what exactly is happening. And I wanted to empower the professorate, and I wanted to empower the associate deans, et cetera, to know what was going on. I wanted to give them an actual tool that said, this is reality. This is not what we wish and hope and our dreams are, but I want to know exactly what's happening in the curriculum at every moment and where things are being taught, by whom, what learning outcomes are being addressed, what learning modalities are being addressed, et cetera, and so on. And it needed to be simple. It needed to be kind of like a Mac, like you just turn it on, it works, or like an iPhone, or like many of the other technologies that we're used to that are very sophisticated, but the human interface with that machine is simple. Oh, and by the way, if we wanted to sell this to everybody, it needed to be less work. This couldn't be something that came as a fiat from administration. I happen to be an assistant dean also. We all are on that kind of level. We can't say to the faculty, we can say, this shall be done even though it's more work. And then we could expect rebellion and passive resistance, that sort of thing. So we said, whatever it is that we do, it needs to be better than what they're doing now. It needs to make their life easier so that we don't have to tell them what to do. And the reality is we've actually got 100% faculty buy-in, which is pretty amazing. So we've actually been able to herd cats this way. Of course, you give them catnip, they all come to you. And then the question came up, well, how are we going to do this? And remember that Dr. Ma talked about we have to agree on data first, and then we have a method of submission, a method of collection, analyzation, and dissemination. And so what I would argue is that we needed one thing, one magic bullet that would make it happen. One thing that would dramatically decrease the workload. So I don't know about you, but we have an LMS, and we're thinking about creating a CMS. Now, is everyone clear about the difference between these learning management systems where you post stuff for students to download, maybe have discussion boards? Content management system, depending on how, or course management system is where you do your curriculum, quote unquote, mapping, arguably, and then a curriculum calendar. We had 3 different technologies, and each of these was not talking to each other. So we said, well, what if we put them all into one machine? In other words, as soon as faculty upload their stuff into a quote-unquote LMS, that populates the CMS and that populates the curriculum calendar, one and done, and we get all the information. That's our sales pitch to the staff and the faculty, is it is in fact much less work. And those of you who are fans of math and complexity know that complexity is proportional to the square of the number of things that are in that system. In other words, 3 things is 9 times harder to manage than 1 thing, because 3 squared is 9. We've all experienced this. If you ever tried to create a big party of 100 people versus 10 people, it's much, much harder to organize as you scale up, and it's actually an exponential function of organization. Facebook has kind of changed that a little bit. But okay, so with that, I'm going to be quiet and let Dr. Thrush talk about how he actually got the buy-in and how he got that 100% participation.
Thank you, Scott. So moving into this part of it, so how do we do this? How do we get the 100% faculty buy-in? And I wanted to refresh everybody's memory. This is a slide that Terry showed earlier. So this is our world. Faculty there's a lot of expectations on the faculty to deliver the curriculum. They have to, there's constantly new information being discovered, and and usually most faculty have less time to teach that information. So under that constraint, how do we get the faculty to buy in, 100% of the faculty to buy in, to be tagging their learning activities? In addition, as Scott alluded to, we are merging together our learning management system, curriculum calendars, and course management systems into one site essentially. And so not only does our solution have to help the faculty, and it needs to be easy for the faculty to be able to do, this is also the same site that the students use to access their learning activities, the PowerPoints, the Word documents, whatever it may be, for a particular lecture or a learning activity. So we had to make sure that the system not only was relatively easy, but it had to serve both the faculty and students. So our goal in developing this product, and basically it's a curriculum calendar onto which we can tag the learning activities. We needed the faculty, 100% of the faculty posting their curricular material and tagging it with the appropriate learning activities or the learning outcomes. And also, we need to be able to have a system from which we could draw the information and present that information back to the key stakeholders, whether it be the students, faculty, or administrators. And so the question is, were we responsive to our stakeholders? And so what I'll move into is I've taken a number of screenshots of our curricular calendars, and I'm going to walk you through what it looks like for both students and faculty. It's basically one site. It looks the same for everybody. So basically, a student or faculty would log into our website, and then the curriculum calendar, here it's showing you from January of last year. So pretty much it's a week schedule for the medical school curriculum. What I've done is I've highlighted a particular day and then expanded that, so we're looking at a single day view. And in this case, I want to highlight one particular lecture. So if I were to double click on that lecture, I would see this would show up. And this would give anybody looking at it information about when does the lecture or the learning activity start, when does it end, where is it located, who is lecturing, who's the faculty member for that particular lecture. In addition, further down that page, there's a link that the students would use to then access, in this case, the Word documents or the PowerPoints for that particular lecture. So by double-clicking on that calendar item, students have immediate access to any of the learning materials that are necessary for that particular lecture. And so that's how students can access whatever they need to. They go to the day of the curriculum, open up the document, they can then download whatever they need for that particular lecture. Well, what about the faculty? Certainly faculty can do the same thing, but they also have the ability to help prevent the unplanned redundancy that Terry alluded to as well. So let's say I'm teaching in the second year curriculum and I'm going to give a lecture on diabetes. Well, I need to know what were the students already taught about maybe carbohydrate metabolism. And since I didn't give that lecture in the first year, I need to know what the other faculty member did. So I can go into this site and type in the word carbohydrate, and because the faculty tag the lecture with MESH terms, and I'll show you how we do that in a little bit, and also basically key terms for that particular lecture, I can, as a later faculty member, type in a term, a MESH term, for example, carbohydrates, and then see the lectures that would be relevant to that particular topic. So I have a couple links here. I could say, oh, I want to see what this particular lecture is. Double click on that link, and then once again, I pretty much see when was the lecture given, what course. I can access any document related to the lecture. I see who taught that lecture, so I can communicate with that faculty member if I needed to. Very easy for the faculty to use, in essence, to try to help us improve our curriculum by reducing, in one case, unplanned redundancy. What about entering the learning activities into the calendar? As we mentioned, it has to be easy for the faculty if they're going to do this. So basically, I'm going to walk you through some screenshots of what it looks like. So if I go, sorry, hold still or hold it up? Hold it up here? Is that okay? Right there? Okay. I'm sorry? Okay. A little technical interruption here. How's that? Is that okay? Is that okay? So if I were a faculty member and I needed to enter my lecture activities into the calendar, I would just go to this particular date, and I just arbitrarily picked this Saturday. So I would double click on it, and then basically a form opens up for which I can start entering information. So I'd enter in the title. That is up to me as the faculty member to type in the title of my particular lecture. The date and start time I can adjust if necessary. What is key, and this is both Scott and Terry alluded to, is the defined set of terminology or defined set of data. These are all of our courses. I have to make sure, or we have to make sure, that the faculty are typing in the same title, not using abbreviations or not, fully abbreviating the name of the course. So this drop-down menu basically makes sure that any faculty teaching in a particular course, for example, Introduction to the Study of Medicine, they're using the same term. They're not abbreviating it and calling it ISM, for example. So the faculty would click on whichever the course they're involved with. What about the learning activities? Using the Medbiquitous terms for learning activities, this defined set of terms, all the faculty are using the same set. So once again, a drop-down menu, click on the appropriate learning activity. Whoops, let me go back here. Okay, that's it for that one. Which faculty are involved? So if I were given the lecture, I'd type my name in there. And for all employees of the university, basically, once you start typing in the name, it'll do a lookup, so I make sure the spelling is correct. For example, me, I go by the name Jerry. I don't usually use Gerald. Well, what if I typed in Jerry instead of Gerald? Well, that will make the data a little bit muddier. So in this way, all faculty are using the same title that is basically their employee name at the university. So that would be essentially, once I start typing in my name, I can do a lookup and make sure it's spelled correctly. In addition, what if I want somebody else to be able to edit the site, or maybe it's a lecturer who teaches with me? So I typed in here Scott's name, so both of us would be allowed to, at a later time, go back and edit the particular calendar item as needed. Mesh terms, once again, common terminology for everybody to use, in this case, the medical subject headings. We have a line in the form that says mesh, so the faculty would go in and basically type in a word that or a key term related to the particular learning activity. I started typing in the word immuno, and there's this autocomplete basically function where you see any word in the database that has the first letters called immuno, and then I can select, okay, this lecture is going to be on immunoassay. So I can click on that particular term. What about if I typed in a term that's not in the MESH database? So here I type in campus technology. Well, that is not a recognized term in MESH. I cannot just go in and put in any term. It has to be in the MESH database to once again keep all the faculty using the same set of terminology. So this system would not allow me to save this document or this calendar item with the words campus technology in it. What about the institutional learning outcomes, program learning outcomes, et cetera? Basically, buttons that faculty could select for the particular learning activity, ILOs, program learning outcomes. Each faculty would then click whichever heading is appropriate for that particular lecture. NBOME is our licensing board exam company, so whichever topic is appropriate for that lecture, once again, the faculty would be able to tag it. And then they're able to save the particular item. In addition, they can also upload any document that's related to that particular lecture. So here's what it looks like when I started, an empty box. At the end of the process, there it is. The calendar item is now in the system for everybody to be able to see essentially instantaneously. So how do we get 100% of the faculty buy-in? The key thing that worked for us is basically showing the faculty the benefit. First of all, once we started tagging these, we could generate data, and Scott will show you some examples of that. We then showed it to the faculty. Once they saw what information could be gathered, they understood what was going on, and that lessened the pushback that we had from the faculty. So basically, taking the data and showing it back to the stakeholders was key for us to get all the faculty involved. In addition, this is a new process for the faculty, so we sat down with each course and the faculty involved in the course, showed them how to work through the site, listened to them, took their advice if there were changes that needed to be made, and followed up afterwards. After a course was over, we followed up with them to make sure that the system worked well. And then lastly, and I already alluded to this, report back to the stakeholders on the outcomes. The information basically generated from the system was key for us to be able to get all the faculty involved in this particular system. And so with that, I think I'm turning it back over to Scott.
Okay, and I'm gonna try something here really dangerous. I'm going to move our AV equipment 3 feet and hope that it still works, because I want to show you a demo. So this is actually the fun part for me. This is where I got to geek out. So when I sort of proposed this to our faculty, I could envision exactly what I was trying to do. I had no idea how I was going to do it, but I knew, like Terry and Jerry have been saying, that it had to be, so long as I had this data standardized, right? So long as I could lock in the data, then I'd figure this out. So I created this talk, and I had no idea how we're going to do it earlier for other talks that are similar to this one. And then, about, I don't know, eight weeks come up on the talk. I'm like, oh, wow, I better build the thing, right? So that's what we're going to show. So what's really neat about this is, honestly, you guys have probably figured out that we use SharePoint, and we just hacked SharePoint to our bidding. We did some fancy work on SharePoint, which is a product by Microsoft. SharePoint is to building web forms and workflows, what .NET is to programming. It's an amazing platform, very, very dynamic, and so we made it do our bidding. And what's neat is because it's just a simple web form for faculty, for us and the faculty, they can literally just export all the data to Excel. So we're actually using very lowbrow, easy-to-use technology that's right here on your laptop that then has extremely powerful ramifications of things I'm not aware other softwares do. So, and literally I use pivot charts, slicers, and tables. And the end result of that is something like this. And hopefully the demo gods will be nice to me and let me display this in a way that you can see. And if they can't, then I'll fix it. So I'm not sure what I did wrong here. Give me a second. Maybe I need to, of course, it's always a danger when the chief technology officer is the one that gets up here, because then things don't work, right? So the first thing that I want to draw your attention to is this graph here. What we're showing basically is the number of learning activities, or actually the number of tags that exist over time. The bottom axis here is the week number in the curriculum, and it goes all the way out to about 80 some odd. So these are the first 2 years. Uh-oh, I'm doing something wrong here. This is the first 2 weeks of the medical school curriculum. It's approximately 80 weeks, the first 2 years. And, yes? Okay, 2 years. And what I'm showing here are the week numbers. Now, this may not seem very interesting, except for the fact that you see sort of how we scale up the learning, and then it goes down, then we scale up the learning and go down. So you see a pattern here. But what gets really interesting really fast is if we say, I want to know specifically where in the curriculum we talk about acetyl-coenzyme A. Right? Before, if you said, where do you teach acetyl-coenzyme A? I want to know right now. You couldn't tell me. You'd have to go do a search or talk to somebody. They go look at a bunch of papers, or they go search Blackboard or something like that and hope they could find acetyl-coenzyme A. Here we click, and now we know. We teach acetyl-coenzyme A in week 18 for 1.5 hours. It is a lecture. It is taught in the molecular biology, cellular basis of medicine class. And who teaches it? Dr. Matsouros. I don't know, I'm having trouble here with the, excuse me, with the thing. So Dr. Matsouros. And the title of her talk is Biochemistry and Gluconeogenesis. So instantly, we can tell you where any of these things are taught. I can do the same for acidosis and so on ad nauseum, and just sort of show you where in the curriculum a particular topic or several topics are taught and by whom. So that's kind of neat. That's kind of powerful. But we can do other things too. Like, for example, I can click on institutional learning outcomes. That's all I'm interested in right now. And I say, tell me where you talk about breadth and depth of clinical knowledge. Okay? When I click on that, you see, okay, in week 1, we immediately start talking about critical thinking. And, I'm sorry, breadth and depth of knowledge. And if I go down the bottom here, we have 1,431 activities that are tagged with that term. Well, we say critical thinking. Apparently, that's supposed to be important when you're a doctor. You're supposed to be able to critically think. I wonder how much we do there. Well, you see the graph looks a lot different. The magnitude of which we discuss critical thinking is a lot less. And you'll see that, remember before it was about 1,400 items? There's only 174 items now. And you wonder why your doctors do the same thing. How about collaboration skills? Right? We say, oh, it's very important for doctors to collaborate with nurses and nurse practitioners, et cetera. You're shaking your head. Are you a nurse? So collaboration skills. So be very afraid. I'm sorry to report that we don't even talk about collaboration until week 26. So here we have in our mission statement, collaborative, I don't know, holistic, something, something, something. Lifelong learners. Oh, lifelong learning. That's even better. So lifelong learners, yeah, also very important in the curriculum. As you can see, we talk about it in week 26. So you're starting to get a picture of sort of the power of this. Now, the neat thing that we can do is we can do things like we can actually zero in on a particular professor. So I'm going to pick on Dr. Chu. So with Dr. Chu, I can show you that she only does laboratory and lecture in terms of activities. And she only teaches medical gross anatomy. And as far as ILOs go, well, let's see how many she does here. Oh, this is the, no, it'll be here. Oh, this is the wrong place. I'll show you somewhere else because I have another graph. Oh, breadth and depth of knowledge is all she does. But I'll show you a better view of this data. So you get the idea that anywhere in time in the curriculum, I can tell who is doing what. I can tell what professor teaches when they teach. So maybe that's what I should show you next. So Dr. Chu, if I say, what is Dr. Chu doing in the curriculum? Where is she teaching? This immediately tells me she teaches week 10 and 11 and 12 for 9 hours, 14 hours, and 4 hours respectively. And they're all labs and lectures. And of course you can say, well, show me where she lectures versus where she does lab, that kind of thing. Now, for those of you in education business other than medicine, this may not seem that revolutionary, but I'm telling you it is for us. Because remember we said there's hundreds of people teaching in the curriculum. If I had asked as an administrator, where does this person teach? How does she teach? What terms does she bring up in MESH? What ILOs and PLOs is she teaching? You'd be like, what are you, crazy? And even our accreditation body came in, I kind of had to snicker a little bit. They're like, we know it's too hard for you to tell us where everybody's teaching what and how it's being taught. So we're going to focus on one learning outcome and one signature assignment because, and the reality was they think that it's too hard to do. And the reality is it is too hard to do without technology. But now like this, I just say, what did you want to know again? And I literally click and there's your answer. And without being cocky, just ta-da, like magic, right? It's a different way of looking at the universe that I don't think many other people are doing. So here's another way of looking at the data. So pie charts are fun. It's a great way to manipulate and misrepresent data. But I think here it actually does a good job of representing our data. So here is our entire curriculum by institutional learning outcomes. And our institutional learning outcomes are breadth and depth of knowledge, critical thinking, humanistic practice, and so on and so forth. Now, we're an osteopathic medical school. And in our mission statement says something about humanism and humanistic practice. I'm an osteopath. Guilty as charged. Well, it's interesting to me that breadth and depth of knowledge, which is great, people need to be knowledgeable, is 63% of our curriculum, but humanistic practice takes up a whopping 3%. Okay? So I'm going to call the yellow BS card and say, really? And our critical thinking is a whopping 11% of the curriculum. And furthermore, I can pick on people. I can say, well, what about Dr. Thrush? Let's pick on him. It's Gerald, right? Okay, good. Gerald Thrush, how's he doing? So actually, he has a pretty good balance. I mean, I don't know what a good or a bad balance is, but he definitely has a more distributed balance of these things in his talks. Whereas if I pick on someone like Amy Chu, and Amy's great, we're not, she's not doing a bad job. It's where she teaches in the curriculum, but you can immediately see the difference. And furthermore, we can do it on a course-by-course basis. We can say, well, what about the cardiovascular system? And what about the anatomy? I don't know why anatomy's not here. But, and so on and so forth. So we can immediately drill down by course, and we can even drill down by, for example, the learning activity type. So if I wanted to know, when we do, for example, lecture, what is the breakdown of our learning activities? And it looks pretty similar, right, to what you saw before. Well, what about peer teaching? Isn't that interesting? Peer teaching is all breadth and depth of knowledge. You would think that'd be collaboration, right? So you can start to look at the curriculum very critically and say, why is peer teaching marked as breadth and depth of knowledge when maybe it should be something else? The other thing that I can show you is we have this sort of program learning outcomes. These are the ones for the college and also for our boards. So when all our medical students have to take medical licensing boards, so we can break down the curriculum the same way. We don't have a class in behavioral science or physiology. These are taught throughout the curriculum. So previously there was no way to know where exactly we were teaching physiology per se and how it was being taught. Now we can do that with this mapping. So I think I'm going to bring it on home. Is there anything else you guys think I should show, or have I kind of beat that to death? Good. All right, so I'm going to move forward. So the question then is, how can you do the same? So bringing this back down to earth, right? The first thing you need to do is you need to come up with a standardized vocabulary. You have to have some standard that you agree to. We gave a talk in Spain, so this very similar talk to this, and they're struggling right now in Europe to have a standardized ontology and dictionary terms for the osteopathic profession in Europe, which is different than the one in America, right? So if you don't have a vocabulary that you've agreed on, don't even start. Don't start building any technology. No amount of technology is going to save you. You have to standardize on that. The second thing you need to do is design an interface. And that interface has to have an input, an output, and an export function. And I would argue that the most important thing about the design interface is that it's user-friendly and makes less work for your faculty. If you make it more work, you're dead. It's not going to work. And finally, you need to have this mapping function. And that was what you saw with simple. I just used Excel. Could I do it in a web page? Sure. Could I do it in other technologies? Absolutely. But it doesn't matter because at the end, we have a map. And that map just needs to allow you to visualize, pivot, and drill down. These three things are very powerful and something that I would argue that our so-called curriculum architecting maps that we use currently cannot compete with and are nowhere near as insightful or as granular or as dynamic. And by the way, all of this data I showed you is in real time. If I just clicked on update data from that Excel file, it would actually talk to our database, import the latest data in about 2 seconds, and we'd have exactly what's going on in the classroom right this second, up to date. And with that, I'm going to open it up for discussion. That's our presentation, and thank you for your attention. I really appreciate it. We both do, all three of us. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
How long did the process take to actually get all those courses sort of in the system?
Sure. I can repeat the question if you want. How long did it take to get all the courses into the system? Do you want me to answer that, or you want to answer that?
1 year, basically, because what we did, we started at the beginning of the academic year. Excuse me, out of the beginning of the academic year for both we're up to the second year of the curriculum. So in our first year or second year curriculum, and as the faculty were entering and uploading their information, similar to what they do in a learning management system, it was, they were basically entering in their data. By the end of the academic year, that's what we have.
So one of the ways for this we call organic curriculum mapping. And the reason for that was, people they think that there's some secretary or somebody that has to enter all this data in. And I said, no, that's ridiculous. It's 2014, not 1814. As the faculty are entering their assignments, this curriculum map is being built. So basically, you've crowdsourced the work, right? For the individual faculty member, you saw Dr. Chu teaches maybe 11 lectures a year. It's no big deal. She uploads her stuff, she does her checkboxes, types a few mesh terms, and hits OK. It's no different than uploading something to Blackboard, except for the fact that she does a couple of checkboxes and may search a couple of mesh terms. So yes, it took a year, but after a year, we had 2 years of curriculum, right? Because you have first years and you have second years. So when you say go, whoosh, they're going in parallel. And you can do the same if you had 4 years or 18 years of curriculum. If everybody starts at the first year, then whoop, in 1 year, you would have 18 years of curriculum.
So in medical education, we do have one slight advantage, and that is that we're all cohort-based so that the students go lockstep through in a cohort fashion. However, as Scott mentioned, it is still not impossible if you're going to have folks or upload material into a learning management system. Lots of learning management systems will do a new search of materials even when you roll over courses from one course to the next. So this type of technology is not it's not limited, and it can be very, very easy. It also allows faculty a fresh look at their courses.
Also implicit in your question is how long did it take to build the technology surrounding the system? So I sort of envisioned this in April of 2013, got the right people in the room, and we had several meetings. And that includes people who actually, how do I put this, like administrative assistants all the way up to faculty, all the way up to administration, like the right people in the room. We had several meetings, so we started in April. Oh, and someone named Sean McBride, who should also be on here, who is our SharePoint expert. So I can do about 80% of this in SharePoint, but the other 20%, like that mesh term autocomplete, that's super cool. That's way beyond my ability. So from April 2013, we were ready live August 1st, same year. So it took us, 5 months from vision all the way to actually doing it for real and with very little problems and very little modification at that point.
So the product
Yes.
is SharePoint.
Yes, the product we're using, so the platform we're using is SharePoint. And then what's that?
Did you modify?
Yes, we modified SharePoint. But SharePoint is meant to be modified. A lot of people don't realize Ferrari.com, the really fast, sexy cars, that's all built on SharePoint, that website. So you have it's so morphable, if you will, that, whatever your preconceived notions about, well, it's where you share folders. It's kind of like Google Docs. No, it's not. It's a whole platform that you can do amazing things with it if you're just very imaginative and then ask the right questions. SharePoint. And I'm not pushing SharePoint. There are all kinds of ways you could do this. Yes, next one.
Are you integrating? Is it? Yeah. Are you integrating SharePoint with your LMS, or are you using SharePoint as your LMS? How and what do you use if it?
Right. So we've replaced our LMS, our CMS, and our curriculum calendar with SharePoint. They're all one now. So the integration is in the design. That it's one. When you do the calendar, that is then transmuted, if you will, instantly into the LMS as well as the CMS.
So basically, all the documents are on the calendar as I showed you. What I didn't show you off to the left would be the discussion boards, other external links, webcast recordings, whatever it may be. That's in there as well.
Yeah, this is all SharePoint that you're looking at here. And so when you enter your data into SharePoint like this, then it goes into the calendar, goes into the LMS as well. And like he said, there's also discussion boards and other things that we have running in SharePoint. Yeah, yes. Right, so grades captured in SharePoint. Do you want to answer that? No? Oh, me again? So I also created a technology called Academic Progress Portal, which I've talked about here at Campus Technology. All of our grades, every single item that any student's ever been graded on ever is put into a system that we developed called the Academic Progress Portal. So no, in SharePoint, we do not use it for grades. I'm sure you could, but we already had something called the Academic Progress Portal that basically tracks longitudinally the progress of these students, not just their course grades, but every single score they've ever had, including in college, their pre-admissions GPAs, their medical college admission tests, all the way through all of their board exams and even what residencies they go into. So
And I think it was roughly 4 or 5 years ago that we moved away from the traditional LMS into SharePoint. At that time, we were not using it in the calendar form. It was basically for document posting. So the reason we were able to do that relatively easily is because of Scott's academic progress portal that we were using for the grades.
And we talked about that at Campus Technology. You can search it. I think it's called leaving the LMS, or no, leaving the LMS, checking out of the Hotel California. So we had it with our commercial vendor, and they kind of did this to us, and we said, really? So I did something with a different finger, and I created the system. We created the system out of scratch. So it wasn't that hard. That took us 2 weeks, actually, to replace the LMS. 2 weeks. So.
Is there a student-facing component to this? What do the students see out of it?
Yeah. So the students, I think Dr. Thrush showed that at the very beginning. Sorry if you guys get a headache here, but so this is what the students see here. As far as the calendar is concerned, there's more to it than this. But when they want to see, like the medical students, they just want to know what's going to be on the test. So they just drill in, and then they find the materials here. There's a lot more to what the students see than just this, but this is how they download their material.
They also can do the same searching. So if they remembered, boy, Dr. Thrush is going to lecture on allergies, and I know he talked about that last year, let me go refresh my memory, they could type in the search function just like faculty can. So it's another resource available to them that was certainly not in our previous LMS.
And one major difference is LMSs see the world through courses, right? The atomic unit of an LMS is a course. And the whole world revolves around that course. Well, that's not how medical school works. Medical school is a continuum of education, right? It's not like, oh, I took anatomy, now I'm an expert surgeon. So this calendar, while we do have courses as a theme running throughout, it is a whole calendar. When you look at the calendar, you are not looking at a course. You are looking at what are you doing today. Now, if you'll notice, it says OM 5145 in the upper left-hand corner, but if you look in the lower left-hand corner, OM 5180. So all of their courses are in this calendar, running simultaneously, and the single unit is actually the learning activity, not the course. So it's that learning activity, that's the atomic unit, and we happen to have it in 1 hour, more or less, units. The School of Dentistry is 15 minutes, actually. Each learning module is 15 minutes. And so if you have an hour slot, you have 4 different things in there, but it doesn't have to necessarily be 1 hour. We are more traditional, where we look at the world as in 1 hour blocks, but the next logical step would be to break it down even further. What does time matter if you know what you want to teach and you know how long it takes? Other questions? Excellent questions. Thank you so much. Yes, sir?
Do you have a separate instance of this up at Einstein? Or
Do we have a separate instance of this at Einstein?
The answer to that is no. We don't use this at Einstein at this time. We are undergoing our accreditation visit in December. We will see what will happen after our accreditation visit. I make no promises.
And we also have an accreditation visit about, what is it, March? February, March. I better know when it is. I'm supposed to be there. And we had already done this long before, we'd already made steps towards doing this. This could be potentially very disruptive if you're within a year of an accreditation cycle for obvious reasons. And we were very lucky that, honestly, and you can buy me a drink later, Dr. Thrush was key in this. So I had, I'll take the credit for the vision for the technology, but I knew without someone like Dr. Thrush, she's very popular, always wins all the awards, teaching awards, very well respected by the faculty and students alike, that without a key person like him to really soften the message and not be the tech nerd like me going, hey, it's going to be great, everybody, do the robot, whatever. He was the one that really greased the skids. So you need someone like that on your campus who can talk to the faculty in a way that is convincing, and also to talk back to me and say, Scott, you're full of it. This will never work because, and then you fix the because. And then you go talk to the faculty once you've figured out the key things that are going to stop the faculty from doing it. So thanks for buying me a drink tonight. Appreciate that. No, just kidding. Anyone else? Okay, and we'll be around the hall if you want to talk to us. Again, thank you for your attention and good luck out there. I hope you guys are able to create something similar.